Some farewells don't announce themselves. They arrive softly, and settle in slowly, a space to honor the American stars we've lost, along with beloved figures from around the world. If these tributes mean something to you, sharing them helps ensure these lives aren't forgotten. Dave Mason, gone at 79. Word came through the way it usually does with musicians like him, without fanfare. A simple, dignified announcement. No headlines fighting for attention, just the truth sitting there quietly. And for anyone who was paying attention to music in the late 60s and early 70s, it matters. Dave Mason wasn't the kind of artist who demanded your focus. He drew it in without trying. With Traffic, he was part of something that felt grounded at a moment when everything in music was shifting beneath people's feet. Those songs had room to breathe. They weren't in a hurry, and neither was he. The connections he built tell you a lot about who he was. Jimi Hendrix, the Rolling Stones, Eric Clapton, George Harrison, these weren't chance encounters. He moved in those circles as an equal. A peer trusted by peers. He wasn't chasing the spotlight. He was adding something real to the spaces between it. By most accounts, his offstage life reflected the same values: steady, private, more invested in craft than celebrity. And now you find yourself doing the math. How many voices from that generation are still with us? Fewer every season. The songs haven't gone anywhere. They're still out there. But knowing the hands that built them have fallen still, that changes how they sound just a little. Quincy Delight Jones Jr., gone at 91. There's a moment of stillness that comes with saying that name now. Because for so long Quincy Jones wasn't just a contributor to American music, he was the underlying structure of it. The confirmation of his passing came quietly, and it carried enormous weight. If you lived through any stretch of time between the 60s and the 80s, his work found you whether you knew it or not. Jazz, soul, film, television, he moved through all of it, not as a visitor, but as someone reshaping the rooms he entered. And then came those records that felt like they defined entire chapters of cultural history. That wasn't luck. 79 Grammy nominations, 27 wins, the Grammy Legend Award in 1991, by that point, he had already earned that title many times over. But the numbers only tell part of the story. What people actually hold on to is the feeling. The sense that everything became bigger, sharper, more fully realized when his name was attached. He worked with the best because he knew how to pull the best out of them, and he expected nothing less. There's a longer arc here too. From his early years in Chicago to the center of Los Angeles's recording world, from orchestrating big bands to producing music that crossed every imaginable border, that kind of range doesn't just happen. It's built through discipline, through long nights, through refusing to coast. And now another architect of that generation is gone. The recordings he left behind are pristine. They always will be. But the room where so much was built is quieter now. Wayne Moss, gone at 88. The name might not immediately ring a bell for everyone. But the sound he helped create, that will reach you. The news came without commotion. A respectful acknowledgement that one of Nashville's quiet foundational figures had left. If you really listened to country records in the 60s and 70s, you heard him, even if you didn't know it. Wayne Moss wasn't the one on the album cover. He was the reason the album felt right. His guitar gave records their spine. His bass lines weren't asking for recognition, they were earning it, one session at a time. Back in 1961, he opened Cinderella Sound. Not glamorous, but serious. A working studio where musicians arrived and songs got built. By 2011, it was still standing, the oldest independent studio in Nashville, still operating. That kind of longevity says something about what he valued. He helped found Area Code 615 and Barefoot Jerry, groups that carried the same philosophy, loose but skilled, rooted in the kind of musicianship that comes from living it rather than learning it. The people who worked alongside him described someone without ego, someone who simply showed up and got it right, over and over. And that's the thing that's easy to miss from the outside. So many of the records that shaped American popular music were assembled by craftsmen like him, not always visible, always essential. Nashville has changed dramatically. And the number of those original builders who are still here keeps shrinking. The songs are still spinning somewhere tonight. They sound the same. But they carry something different now. Al Pacino. There was always something unfinished about Al Pacino, even at the top. Even when his name carried enormous weight. Beneath the roles, you could still sense the kid he once was, the one from the Bronx, the one who didn't quite know where he fit. He was born in 1940 in East Harlem, but it was the South Bronx that left its mark. His parents separated when he was too young to process it, old enough to carry it. He grew up in a small apartment with his mother and grandparents, little space, little money, little room for uncertainty. School couldn't hold him. By his early teens he was disconnecting from it slowly, not dramatically, just drifting like someone still searching for a reason to stay. Then something landed. He saw a play. Nothing spectacular about the moment itself, but the feeling it left wouldn't leave him, the idea that performance could carry truth, that becoming someone else could reveal something real. It stayed. At 17, he dropped out. Not with confidence. With something messier than that. He took whatever work he could find, janitor, messenger, odd jobs that kept him fed. There were nights spent on friends' couches, stretches where acting felt less like a calling and more like a fantasy already slipping. But he didn't let go. In the early 60s, he found his way to HB Studio, then the Actors Studio, and something started forming. Slowly, painfully. Years of rejection and small roles. Then 1969, a Broadway production, Does a Tiger Wear a Necktie, a Tony Award, and suddenly people were watching. Still, nothing about him read like a conventional star. Not his look, not his manner. Which made the casting of Michael Corleone in The Godfather in 1972 so surprising to so many people, including the studio. Too quiet. Too unknown. But when the film arrived, the arguments evaporated. There was something happening with this man on screen that people couldn't define and couldn't look away from. The aftermath wasn't what you might expect. Fame didn't make him comfortable. If anything, he pulled back from it, uncertain of what he'd walked into. But the roles kept arriving. Serpico in 1973 felt personal in a way that went beyond the script. A man who wouldn't bend. Something in Pacino seemed to understand that from the inside. Then Dog Day Afternoon in 1975, a performance built on unraveling. Raw, unpredictable, almost uncomfortable. A kind of emotional exposure that wasn't common on screen at the time. That became his signature, in a way. Not safe characters. Men under pressure. Men carrying something they couldn't put down. But none of that was happening in a vacuum. Through the late 70s and into the 80s, he stepped back periodically. No announcements. Theater called him, smaller spaces, live audiences, something more direct and honest. And then came Scarface in 1983. A role that could have collapsed under its own weight. It didn't. Tony Montana was enormous, loud, almost mythological. But underneath it, collapse in slow motion. A man whose empire was built on the terror of losing it. Not every choice landed after that. Critics started questioning whether he had become too theatrical, too submerged in his own intensity. And maybe there was some truth in it. When you pour that much into characters, something doesn't entirely shut off when the day ends. By the mid to late 80s, his presence had thinned on screen. Then 1992 and Scent of a Woman. Colonel Slade. That performance didn't read like a comeback. It read like something being released. Measured, still intense, but grounded in something older. The Academy Award followed, after so many nominations. And even then, he received it without the energy of arrival. More like a pause. Because by that point, he already understood something most people take years to learn. Recognition doesn't silence anything. Sometimes it makes the noise louder. The version of Al Pacino that people think they know, the voice, the presence that fills a space before he speaks, that image has softened over time. Not erased. Clarified. He never chased staying visible. Never performed relevance. There were years he seemed to recede. Then he'd return. Heat in 1995 with Robert De Niro, that diner scene with two men, no theater, just decades of craft hovering between them in the silence. Later, the insider, any given Sunday, roles that carried age in them, awareness, pauses that weren't empty. Aging came quietly, as it does. Energy changes. The hours feel different. Roles shift even when you'd rather they didn't. He never built a personal life that looked stable from the outside. Relationships came and went. Fatherhood arrived later, and it seemed to reach something deeper, a different kind of weight, a different kind of presence. Some questioned him again as the years passed. Said he was repeating himself. Said he'd already given what he had. But if you watched closely, that wasn't quite the whole truth. In The Irishman in 2019, there was something new, quieter than fire, closer to reflection. A man looking back at time rather than forward through it. And it didn't feel entirely like acting. He's still here. Still working. Still stepping into characters, not with urgency anymore, but with something more deliberate. Like someone who understands the weight of every word and every silence. And for the people who have watched him across decades, that might be the most honest version of all. Not the legend. The man who never quite separated himself from the work, and who is still, quietly, choosing to keep going. Gary Robert Rossington, gone at 71. For a lot of people, this one lands differently. His guitar wasn't just an instrument inside the music, it was what the music felt like. The news came clearly, without uncertainty. One of the last original voices of Lynyrd Skynyrd was gone. And that settles heavily on anyone who grew up in that era. Gary Rossington helped give shape to Southern rock before anyone had thought to call it that, just a group of young men out of Jacksonville playing honest, unfiltered music. Songs that carried the weight of open roads and something harder to name. Not chasing polish. Chasing truth. Then 1977, and a plane crash that changed everything overnight. He stayed. Carried the name forward when so many couldn't. When you think about what that kind of endurance actually costs a person, it becomes clear that nothing about him was unchanged by it. Later, with the Rossington Collins Band, you could hear it in the playing, still strong, but settled. Like the years had found a home in every note. People who knew him said he never seemed interested in attention. He didn't need it. The guitar said everything. Those slow bends. That sound, unmistakable and unrepeatable. You hear it once and it doesn't leave you. He was the last original member standing. The final connection to something that shaped an entire chapter of American music. The songs are still there, still will be. But something has gone quiet now, like a long road that finally came to rest just beyond where the eye can reach.